Hey all, welcome to Parker's Reef. On today's episode, I'm going to show you how I tackled bubble algae in my Dream Reef Tank and beat it successfully. Alright guys, thank you for joining me on another episode of Parker's Reef. Just before we jump into the main topic of today's video about beating the bubble algae in my Dream Reef Tank, I wanted to give a huge shout out to some local reefers here. They've set up an Instagram page called Craft Deck AU, and they make a range of both custom and also off-the-shelf reefing t-shirts. I managed to pick up a bunch of swag from those guys, and I gotta say, having my own Parker's Reef t-shirts were pretty cool. They can custom make them to suit your reefing brand or whatever you want to have on a t-shirt, they can make them. And to be honest, they're a pretty good fit and they're a really affordable price. So big shout out to Craft Deck AU for the t-shirts. Now, we best get on to the main topic of today's video, which was beating bubble algae in my Dream Reef Tank. For those of you who have followed my journey with this tank over the last couple of years will know that from a pretty early on stage, I've had three main pests in this tank that, to be honest, I haven't really overstressed about. I've had vermitid snails on there pretty much from day one, or from the first coral that went in the system. I never seem to overreact to vermitid snails. I've never really had massive issues with them. I know that they must be a different problem for people with different tanks. So I'm not sure if it's my fish to keep them at bay or whether I've got a different type of vermitid, whatever it is, they don't seem to cause a huge issue for me. The second pest I've had in this tank has been Aiptasia, and I still have a pretty healthy amount of Aiptasia in this system. I added the Australian stripey and a filefish, which both showed zero interest in Aiptasia until they saw me killing one with some Aiptasia X, and then all of a sudden they both got super interested. And to be fair, they kept it mostly at bay. There's a few big ones in the system where I don't think they can get to, which just keeps spawning off a few babies. But again, it's not something I'm going to overreact to. I don't find the Aiptasias are getting out of control and killing coral or anything like that. So I want to make sure that the solution or the fix is not a bigger problem than the problem itself. And at this point in time, the problem's not really a problem at all. So the Aiptasia I'm letting go for now, and I'm just hoping that this big chunky Australian stripey gets a little taste for him again, or he can maybe lose a bit of weight and get into the spots for the ones that he can't get at the moment. But then there is the third pest algae that's been in this system for almost since it started, probably about the same sort of timeline as the Aiptasia, and that is bubble algae. Now, for those of us in Australia, that's a little bit more of a complicated problem than elsewhere in the world, because if you do not know, we cannot actually import inverts to Australia. We can import fish, we cannot import inverts, and we definitely cannot import coral into Australia. So things like emerald crabs and other natural solutions to bubble algae are just not available to us here, which poses a pretty big problem because bubble algae is a pretty common problem, and it can quickly take over a reef tank. And whilst I didn't overreact to it when I first saw it, I saw a few bits of bubble algae, mostly on plastic parts of my tank, so on the insides of pump covers and occasionally appearing on my magnet cleaner and things like that. I didn't want to overreact to it again because, like I touched on before, I'll make sure that the solution's not more detrimental than the problem itself. And for the good part of 2 years, bubble algae had not been an issue at all, until fairly recently, where it did sort of go through a bit of a growth spurt and I did lose a couple of colonies. Now, the colonies very quickly after dying off were littered with bubble algae. Now, I don't know if the bubble algae killed the SBS colony or if once the SBS colony died, the bubble algae came on and took over then. But either way, I didn't want to take it for chance or didn't want to take it for granted that bubble algae may well be starting to kill some pieces in my tank. So it was time to jump on the solution. And like I touched on, we don't have access to emerald crabs here. So I went back through my notebook and had a look at what I have used on bubble algae previously, because my existing display tank, the one before my Dream Reef Tank, did have bubble algae outbreaks once, maybe twice in its existence, which was a good 7 years. So I have solved it before, and I had to go back through my notes to find what I had done with it previously. And I came across that I went through a Continuum program that is a little bit intensive, or just a little bit manually intensive, but it gets the job done without having any other real negative effects, and it gets it done in less than 2 weeks. So I figured, now that I've done it on my Dream Reef Tank and it's fresh in my memory, I'd run you through the process as well, should you need to solve bubble algae. Well, the program all hinges around this Continuum clean equation M. Now, I'll go through the entire process because it's not just a silver bullet. There is quite a few steps involved. It is very simple, but it's one of those things you just want to sit down and plan out. Write yourself a bit of a schedule or a planner so you can stick to it and make sure you don't miss any steps. Now, You'll notice the instructions are all on the back of the bottle here, but they are quite in depth, so I just want to break it down into a few different steps that you can simply follow to get the job done. Firstly, before we dose anything, we need to remove the carbon from your tank. If you are running carbon in your system for that water clarity, we'll just need to take that offline because carbon can remove some of the chemicals we're going to add and make them less effective. Next, we want to make sure we're in a position where we can replace or at least run mechanical filtration in the system and have it frequently changed out. This program is going to loosen up a lot of debris and detritus, and we really need that mechanical filtration in there to pull that out for easy removal. You can also give your rocks and things a bit of a turkey base throughout the program just to make sure that you're getting as much flow around your rock, just to help loosen all of that bubble algae and any other detritus that is causing issues off your rock and into the mechanical filtration. All right, the last consideration before we begin is you want to start from a place where you have very low phosphates. I know these days some people like to run a little bit higher in their phosphates, but before we begin this program, it is important to get our phosphates down to 0.02 ppm or even less if possible. The program is probably going to create a little bit of a spike in phosphate, so it is good to start from a very low spot. Just run some extra GFO for the week leading up, or maybe if your reactor runs GFO and carbon, replace the carbon with extra GFO. Let's really starve the system of all phosphates before we begin. And the last consideration before we actually begin dosing is that snails and crabs and the rest of your cleanup crew are completely safe throughout the program. In fact, they're highly encouraged. They're going to do a lot of that work of getting that detritus and debris off your rock and off the substrate surface and up into the water column for the mechanical filtration to remove. So if your numbers of the cleanup crew are a little bit low, it wouldn't hurt to just boost them a little before the program commences. All right, now we get to the spot where we're actually going to build out a little bit of a schedule for the things we dose each day. And starting off, we have Redox Plus. Now what this does is it raises the AUP, the oxidization reduction potential, I believe that's what AUP stands for, in your aquarium. It's going to make it a little bit easier to break down some organic materials. Now, we dose this first thing in the morning and we do 1 drop per 10 liters. There is actually some other instructions on here which goes around how many drops per gallon, but loosely it translates to 1 drop per 10 liters. If anything, that's a little bit on the weak side, and if anything, that's what I'd recommend. This is a very powerful product. Do not overdose it. I run 1 drop per 10 liters in the aquarium. First thing in the morning, I dose that straight into the display tank. I like to do it right in front of the power head so it disperses quickly. You can then pop that one away. All right, next up at lunchtime is our clean equation M. Now this does have a list of instructions that we follow for 6 days. It gradually increases its dose each day, starting off with 2.5 ml per 190 liters. So you can do the calculations there. And then it goes up to 5 ml per 190 liters, then up to 7.5 ml per 100 liters, and so on for 6 days. And then from day 7 through to day 14, we switch to a maintenance dose, which is every second day. So this is why I highly recommend that you get yourself a little bit of a schedule, a planner. You work out exactly how many mil each day you're going to dose. I specifically did that because I dosed all 3 of my reef tanks at the same time. So I had a little sheet printed out with a mark for me, or a spot for me to tick off when I had done that dose each morning, lunch and nighttime. And it just made sure that I wasn't going to mess up the process, because when you're doing 3 doses a day on 3 separate tanks with varying amounts, it quickly gets complicated. So definitely recommend follow the instructions on the back here, spec out how many mil per day you're going to be dosing, and just make sure you give yourself a spot to tick that off so you don't start second guessing whether you have dosed that day or not. All right, then at night time, after we've done the dosage at morning and then at lunch, we come to the night time, we do back to clean M. This just helps keep the bacterial load in the system up. Now what you do, we get a cup of tank water and we mix 5 milliliters per 100 liters of tank volume into that cup of tank water, give it a stir, let it sit for a couple of minutes, and then just pour it into your system. That's the same dosage we run every night. Much like the Redox is the same every morning, it's only the clean equation M that varies each day. We do that throughout the entire program for those first 6 days, and then every second day with the clean equation M on the maintenance days for the second week after that. It sounds confusing, but like I said, if you map it out, it's not too difficult. And then last but not least, once you have got through those first 6 days, and then when we get to day 7, we then alternate that program for the Clean Equation M on the maintenance dosage, which leaves us every other day in between. That's when I like to run it back to Gen M. It's another bacterial source, or it gives it a little bit of extra food for bacteria, and it's dosed much the same way as the Clean M is. Grab a cup of tank water and then put in 5 ml per 200 liters of tank volume into that cup, stir it up, let it sit, and then pour it ideally into the media in your system. So if you've got some ceramic media or something like that where you really want to get a bit of a bacterial house going, pour it straight onto that. Will do the job nicely. Now, if you follow that through for 14 days with the Clean Equation M ramping up each day for the first 6 days, and then going from day 7 through to day 14, alternating every other day on that maintenance dose between the Clean Equation M and the back to Gen M, I should say, you will see the bubble algae get really clear, almost transparent, and then just vanish. Now, I must admit, I'm not 100% certain when it gets clear whether the fish get a bit of an appetite for it, but it goes from looking like it's doing absolutely nothing at all to having almost no bubble algae in your tank overnight. And I was probably a little bit lax in not getting some footage of the bubble algae in this tank prior to the program. I've got one small patch that's just hanging on that I can show you now. I'm at day 12 into the program, and it's looking like it might just need a little bit longer just to give it the final nail in the coffin. I'll show you how that bubble algae looks now, but everywhere else in my system, the bubble algae has completely gone. And as a little benefit, or a little just extra bonus, I guess, the glass in your tank remains clean throughout this entire process, and the live rock and all surfaces just get nice and clean and look really fresh. The coralline algae remains on there, but all of your coral skeletons and all of the rock and all of the surfaces in your aquarium get nice and clean. It just looks like it's going to have a very nice, stable substrate to keep growing coral after there. Now, are there any downsides apart from the fact that you need to do this every day, 3 times a day? Well, with any program like this, there probably is, and I have to say I have had a couple of little increases in patches of cyano, which I don't know if that's directly related to the program or not, because I did have a couple of small patches of cyano before, but I will continue to work through those by boosting my flow and making sure that my KH is elevated for where I like to run my tank. I like to run my tank around 7 to 7.5 DKH. I'll need to bring that up to about 8.5, 9, just to help fight off that cyano. And I did also have one SBS colony, unfortunately one that I got from John Sim. My Cadbury Purple has RT end on me, or ST end, probably more like it, because it's just slowly faded away over the last week or so. Now, again, I don't know if that's directly related to the program, but that's been the only 2 downsides that I've had, and I have wiped bubble algae out from my system, so it gets 2 thumbs up from me. All right, guys, there you have it. I hope that makes sense. Feel free to step through the process, make notes for your aquarium, get all those dosages correct. If you've got any questions, comments, or feedback at all about the Continuum Clean Equation M program, feel free to pop it in the comments section down below. Or if you are a local in Melbourne, feel free to head into Deer Park Aquarium. I work there every Saturday, and I'm more than happy to go through the program and help you spec out the dosages you need to do each day for your aquarium to rid yourself of bubble algae. For those of you in the rest of the world who have access to emerald crabs, this is probably a complete waste of your time. If you do have access to emerald crabs and they do the job for you, I'd highly recommend going the natural approach wherever possible. But if emeralds are not working for you, or like myself, you don't have access to them, consider the Equation Clean M program. It'll get the job done. All right, guys, I'll wrap things up there. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to give it a thumbs up. And if you're yet to join the 23,000 strong subscriber, feel free to join the Parker's Reef family down below. And of course, don't be afraid to yell out to the guys making these custom shirts. I think they're super, super cool, and I'd love to see you guys kicking around with some customized reefing shirts when I see you at your local fish shop next. Anyway, guys, till next time, stay safe, keep reefing. Cheers, bye.